Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the recent concern that is being raised by the Chinese media as well as the Chinese government officials about the changing relationship, or we can say evolving relationship between the two major countries, India and United States. So let us try to understand that what kind of we can say articles that are being published in the Chinese media, how Chinese government officials are looking at the recent evolution in the relation between India and US, especially after coming of Donald Trump. So, in the first instance, if we try to understand what Chinese scholars and the experts argue is that the changing India-US dynamics have been much in the news in the China lately. It is because China claims that India is trying to pursue US, and that is why Narendra Modi recently, the Prime Minister of India, also has travelled to US, which China has said that travelled across almost half the world to ensure that India or New Delhi remains in good book of the Trump administration. And China claims that all these actions are largely pointing toward the worry that Indian diplomacy feels as far as its ties with United States is concerned. Also, they have allegedly stated that Modi was turned away by the Trump, and overall we can say the visit of Prime Minister Modi was a sort of defeat in the United States, claiming that President Trump has dismissed India's overtures. So this is the kind of news and information that is being circulated in the Chinese media. Now, many of the scholars have rightly pointed out that the assumptions that Chinese scholars are making is nothing but a kind of flawed assumption, and the reason is because they states that these assertions imply that the uncertainties and anxieties in dealing with Trump might prompt India to maintain ties with China, which is not correct. Because the success or failure, what many experts argue, that no matter what kind of turn Indo-US relationship takes in the recent future or the near future, it will not have any significant bearing on the Indo-China ties. For example, India has its own issues and concerns with China, whether it is related to the disputes across the border, whether it is related to the trade, whether it is related to what we can call as the disturbances being created along the northeastern border, specifically indirectly by China, or the strengthening, or we can say the stronger relationship or partnership that China has created with Pakistan, who obviously has a bearing, on the India's interest as well. So all these are separate issues, and scholars argue that no matter what kind of Indo-US relationship develop in the future, it will not impact India-China relationship indirectly. Third is the Beijing's growing anxiety about Trump's trade war. This is what counter view we can understand, is that why Beijing or China is trying to paint that India is worried about US change in policy. Rather than that, what actually is happening is China itself is more and more anxious, especially after coming of Trump, and especially after Trump has unleashed a kind of trade war along with China, with Canada as well as with Mexico. India's skillful response to keep Washington in a tight embrace is something that also has sent a shiver down the spine of China. That is also how we can understand this. Apart from this, we try to understand that the relation between three countries, that is China, India and US, can be considered as a triangular relationship, where we have a strengthening India-US partnership as a response to its strategic assertions and territorial aggression with its neighbors, including India. Obviously, China is an important factor whenever there is a discussion between India and United States. The reason is because China has pursued aggressive policy toward almost all its neighbor, whether it is talk about Taiwan, whether it is India, whether it is the Southeast Asian countries such as Vietnam, Malaysia, we have Philippines. So because of this, obviously one of the major interests that India has to have a strong partnership with United States, especially in the defense term, is to ensure that its strategic asserts and strategic autonomy is not compromised by the Chinese behavior. Now obviously we know that we have already seen one term of President Trump, and in the second term, when he has returned to office, obviously because of his unpredictable nature of decisions, both Beijing and Brussels, referring to the European Union headquarters, are in the line of fires on tariff and trade. And many of the scholars argue that we should not consider everything to be bad for India as well, because when the relation between India, US, China, relation between US, European Union, even US and Canada, which is why it's such a strong solidarity and partnership for such a long period of time, if it can be upset, then obviously India will have opportunity to elevate its role as far as the US foreign policy is concerned. So that is how we can understand this. Now, obviously, many scholars have argued rightly that there are signs of instability in the Indo-US relationship, largely because of three factors. The first factor is obviously trade tariff. Trump every now and then has claimed that India levies a very high amount of tariff on the US exports, and also he has reportedly called India as a tariff king, a country which charges the highest amount of tariff for all the partner countries of US. So there is going to be dispute over trade tariff, and India already has begun to take action to address this concern of Trump when import duty on many of the American goods have been slashed. For example, Harley Davidson, if you talk about an American motorcycle brand. Second is technology restrictions. It began even during the time of Joe Biden's presidency, when especially the technology related to the defense and especially technology related to artificial intelligence, machine learning and chips, semiconductors and all that were restricted. And third is obviously the hard immigration policy or stance that Donald Trump has taken, where he has targeted especially the Indian diaspora, or Indian, basically we can say Indian citizens who have tried to migrate into US illegally. You may know about that donkey route and how mistreated they, how were they mistreated, and they were sent back by the US in a military aircraft. So these are three areas of concern which obviously has painted a picture that the Indo-US relationship is facing or undergoing through what you can call as a phase of instability. However, also China has tried to explain this, and by saying that India-US is not a partnership that we can expect to last for a long time, because US does not consider India as a long-term ally. Chinese claims that the only reason why India-US have a stronger partnership today because US consider India as a strategic counterbalance to China as far as the Asia is concerned. However, on the other hand, it also claims that India is also having an interest in having a strong relations with the US, because simply a continued US pressure on China will be advantageous for India, and it will also advance its own economic and technological interests. The reason is very simple, because we talk about the Asian continent specifically, both India and China are vying for economic space, and once economic shrinking of economic space will allow India's economic space to further increase and enhance. Then if you talk about the Indo-US relationship, if you talk about the trade tension that we see in the Indo-US relationship, that also is claimed on the few other factors as well. For example, we know that under the Prime Ministership of Narendra Modi, India has focused upon Make in India ambitions, where they are trying to increase the domestic manufacturing capacity in many sectors, including electrical sector, electronics and communication sectors, semiconductors, and a variety of sectors. On the other hand, under Trump's administration, he has furthered the agenda of America First, where he do not want industries and American companies to go and set up manufacturing bases in other countries. Rather, he wants these companies to create jobs in US itself. He wants these companies to start manufacturing and producing in the US itself. So both of these policies, Make in India and America First, seems to be colliding with each other. That is a matter of concern. Second is other point that the Chinese scholars have raised, that as India is a strategic counterbalance to China, as long as the US is having a strong focus on Indo-Pacific, the relationship becomes a very, very important and crucial one. But now in the Trump's presidency, what we are seeing, that he is focusing less on the Indo-Pacific region, and that will cause overall decline in India's strategic relevance. And that, if indeed it will not bring to, obviously it will not bring to halt the Indo-US partnership, it will at least slow down the momentum at which the Indo-US partnership was strengthening and building up, at least in last 15 to 20 years. However, there is certain counter view as well. Many of the Chinese scholars even argue that Trump's foreign policy would likely prioritize India over Europe, because obviously they are facing a reset of ties, and this has also become interesting, because now we know that US is going heavily to capture, or we can say to take Greenland from the Denmark. So obviously that will be strongly protested by the European Union, European countries, and how this all plays out, we have to wait and watch. So in this case, it will reinforce New Delhi's strategic importance as well. So there are so many factors that are at play, especially after coming of Trump and his unpredictable nature, and that is why we cannot say with 100% certainty that Indo-US ties will become weaker or Indo-US ties will become stronger. Rather, we'll have to wait and watch to see how all these factors collectively play at a global scale. Now, obviously, one thing we are certain about is that the momentum of the Indo-US relationship has been growing, and this can be easily seen in the context of the trade relationship, because now if you compare Indo-China, Indo-US trade relationship, India-US trade has surpassed almost $190 billion of value, which is much more higher than India-China trade. And thus, US has surpassed and has overtaken China as the India's largest trading partner. India and China trade today stands at just $136 billion. And also, if you talk about Indo-US trade, it is in favor of India because India enjoys a trade surplus. On the other hand, in Indo-China trade, India enjoys a trade deficit, or India suffers from the trade deficit. Other area is obviously in the context of defense cooperation, where even after coming of Trump, we did not see any decrease or decline in the momentum of defense relationship. We have signed joint military exercises, a deal about joint military exercises, transfer of defense technology and sharing, and also advanced fighter jet engine manufacturing in India. The US is also trying to sell its most advanced fighter jet aircraft, that is F-35, to India. So all this development points to the fact that Indo-US relationship is far from weakened and weakening. Now, India has pursued a parallel engagement with multiple global players. So India's strategic interest is something that China is trying to ignore or China is trying to overlook. For example, China remains an influential factor in India-US relationship, but it is not a defining factor. As we have discussed before, apart from China, there are many other factors that are at play that is not only dependent on India as only, but also dependent on the US relationship with other countries. Apart from that, the reason why India-US has enjoyed such a strong degree of partnership is because of a convergence of shared interest, whether it is in the domain of security, whether it is in the domain of trade, or whether it is in the domain of technology and technology transfer. India's strategic autonomy remains a guiding principle, and this is something that Chinese have overlooked. In conclusion, overall what we can say is that regardless of Trump's unconventional approach that he has taken, that is very, very different from his predecessors, the Indo-US partnership is set to evolve, balancing cooperation with competition while ensuring that New Delhi remains a pivotal player in global geopolitics. And also one example we can think of is that even when US sanctioned heavily Russia after the Russia-Ukraine war, India did not abandon its oldest allies, and it did not cut off any kind of trade relation with the countries. Rather, we have seen increase in the Russian oil flow to the India. So this shows that the strategic autonomy is something that India has always maintained even in the times of adversity and Western bloc's pressure on it. So that is how we have to understand the development of relationship between India, US, and how China can be another factor in defining it. So that's all for this particular video. If you like the video, please hit the like button, share it with your fellow aspirants, as well as subscribe to our channel for more such content. Thank you very much.